This is Stalag Luft III. Constructed over the course of 2 years between 1942 and 1944 in the dense forests of Sagan, 145 kilometers southeast of Berlin, it became one of the largest prisoner of war camps of its kind in Europe. Designed specifically for the officers of Allied air crews shot down over Axis-occupied territories, this sprawling high-security complex, which comprised 5 separate compounds, would house between 10 to 12,000 prisoners at its peak. But what it's really famous for is not what you see above ground, but what you're not seeing below it. The secret subterranean tunnel that facilitated the greatest escape in history. But before we get into the story behind it, I'd like to thank this video's sponsor, Call of War. Call of War is a free online PvP strategy game set in World War II that allows you to lead a country to triumph or ruin depending on your skill or lack thereof. From there, you can build up your economy, produce units, and invade or befriend other countries. Each game, which can see up to 100 players face off against each other, takes place over the course of several weeks. So the pacing lends itself to a more calculated and strategic experience than the other map games that I've played in the past, such as Hearts of Iron. The player base, as a result, isn't as preoccupied with pulling off sick encirclements and posting them to Reddit for upvotes. If I weren't convinced that some of my allies in Call of War huffed glue before executing battle plans, I'd almost call it the thinking man's map game. Build your war machine on both browser and mobile today and use my link in the description and pinned comment to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium for free. Valid for only 30 days, so act fast. But that's all. Let's get back to the video. As far as prison camps were concerned, Stalag Luft III was a relatively comfortable place to be holed up. Due to their status as officers, prisoners were afforded significant privileges over the average conscript. The northern compound, the site of the escape, boasted a well-stocked library, a swimming pool, a sports field, and a makeshift theatre which occasionally hosted movies and live music. The fact that the camp was operated by the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, meant that there was also a degree of respect and camaraderie between captors and captives. Of course, such positives did little to dissuade prisoners from wanting to escape. They could never know how long they'd remain captive, how long the war would drag on, or what the outcome would be. To sit idly by and accept their imprisonment would be like consigning themselves to a limbo of uncertainty where they had no autonomy and no purpose. So they would make escaping their purpose. Not only did it give them something to occupy themselves and allow them to defy their captors, but it aligned with their sense of duty to the Allied war effort. Any escape attempt that forced the Germans to allocate more manpower and equipment to prevent a prison break or conduct a manhunt drew vital resources away from the Axis front lines and damaged their war machine. There was just one problem. The prison was said to be escape-proof. The compound was surrounded by a set of fences spaced 1.5 meters apart, their tops bristling with barbed wire. Between them lay even more. Even getting to the fences was difficult. If someone stepped over a nearby warning wire while approaching them, they'd be shot on sight. If by some miracle you were able to climb over or cut through them without disemboweling yourself, you'd have to cross another 30 or so meters of no man's land before you reached the sanctuary of the tree line. This was all the while hoping that the guards stationed in the camp's towers went spontaneously blind and became hard of hearing, because if you were spotted, there was nothing to shield you from the machine gun fire. Okay, so brute forcing an escape over the fence wouldn't work. Fine, just dig a tunnel. The Germans supposedly had that covered too. Every hut was built a few inches off the ground to make it harder for inmates to hide their digging beneath the buildings. In addition, the compound had been built on a sandy, silt-like soil that was extremely difficult to tunnel through without causing a collapse. Finally, sensitive microphones were placed underground all around the perimeter of the camp to detect the sound of tunneling. So how did they do it? How did the prisoners of Stalag Luft III build not just any tunnel, but a tunnel that could bypass all of these security precautions? For this massive undertaking, the prisoners of the North Compound established one of the most sophisticated and organised escape industrial complexes ever conceived. Over the course of more than a year between April of 1943 and March of 1944, a group of around 600 American, British and other European prisoners would furnish materials for and construct 3 separate tunnels beneath the compound, hoping that if the Germans found one or two, they would not think to look for a third. To avoid detection in the first place, these tunnels would be disguised with inconspicuous pieces of furniture. The main tunnel we'll be focusing on, nicknamed Harry, was hidden under a metal cooking stove that had been placed over a wooden trapdoor. Each tunnel would be built roughly 7.6 meters underground as to avoid microphones picking up the sound of digging. To prevent any tunnel collapses at this depth, they would need to be reinforced with support beams, which of course was a bit of a problem. It was nearly impossible to smuggle materials into the camp, especially not on the scale required for tunnel construction. The solution to this was to get the Germans to unwittingly provide prisoners with the very materials needed for their escape. Items such as bedboards, chairs, tables and benches would mysteriously disappear or be reported as defective. The Germans were encouraged by neutral third-party inspectors, such as the Red Cross and the Swiss, to provide a minimum standard of living for inmates, so they would often replace these items when they went missing, providing a steady stream of construction goods. Naturally, the heavy rate of turnover for certain items was a point of confusion for the Stalag Luft administration. The camp's commander, Colonel Friedrich von Lindeiner, noted that, quote, "The material required by the camp amounts to 5 times the amount which would be used for German troops using the same accommodation." Of course, the occupants of Wehrmacht facilities weren't fashioning their bedboards into support columns and stealing screws from light fittings to affix table legs to makeshift rails. That's right, rails. To speed up the digging process, the inmates would construct a rail and cart system that stretched along the entirety of the tunnel, shuttling tools, materials and people towards one end and sand back to the other. That was another problem though, the sand. Digging a tunnel required displacing a lot of it, and it couldn't simply be piled up outside of one of the huts because that would immediately arouse suspicion. To make it worse, the sand below ground was yellow and the sand above was grey. To address this, more than 100 men known as penguins would store sand in bags hidden under their coats and covertly release it in the camp's courtyard, kicking it as they did so to blend it with the grey topsoil. In the process, they looked a bit like penguins. To further ensure the project wouldn't be discovered, the inmates employed a constantly rotating roster of watchmen that would alert the tunnelers to approaching guards, allowing them to cover up tunnels before any inspection. This was just as well, since the camp employed specialist anti-escape personnel known as ferrets, whose sole purpose was to sniff out any tunnels and spy on the prisoners. They were only ever one misstep away from discovery and utter failure. To punctuate that point, one of the 3 tunnels being worked on, by the name of Tom, was discovered by ferrets amidst heightened vigilance in September of 1943. Unfortunately, following this discovery, the American prisoners in the northern compound were relocated, as it was deemed that the Brits and the Yanks were getting along far too well with each other. After this incident, a decision was made to focus all efforts onto Tunnel Harry so that it might be ready for an escape attempt when the weather improved in the new year. In the meantime, a detachment of the involved inmates busied themselves with the creation of escape kits containing everything a prisoner would need once outside the compound. This included civilian clothes, compasses, forged identity papers, and maps. The materials required for the creation of these items were often procured by bartering with some of the more sympathetic camp personnel who might be convinced to part ways with some pens, papers, magnets, cloth and cash in exchange for some chocolate and coffee. After months of careful preparation, the tunnel, which had grown to a length of 111 meters, was deemed ready. The prisoners of Stalag Luft III's northern compound would carry out their escape on the night of the 24th of March, 1944. Around 200 prisoners were set to make the attempt, but only those determined to have the best chance of remaining undetected would go first. 30 men, fluent in German, would be given what little money had been accumulated, as well as a head start to try and make it to the nearby Sagan train station before the last train left for the night. Most of the remaining prisoners would have to travel by foot. Each individual had separate travel plans, but most hoped to reach Allied territory via neutral countries. The mood in the compound was tense. The movement of each guard was being tracked and relayed to the escape committee, and each man made his preparations for the long road ahead. At roughly 8:45 that evening, a number of prisoners took up positions at various points inside the tunnel. Lying in cramped conditions, they would pull escapees up along the rails. At around 9:30, one of the men began removing the boards obscuring the entrance to the escape shaft at the end of the tunnel. But they were waterlogged and jammed. It took until 10:15 to finally wrench them loose. This was a significant delay. Night fell around 9 p.m. and the sun came up at 5:30 in the morning. They had just wasted 45 minutes of darkness just trying to get the exit open. To make matters worse, the escape hatch, which had been planned to come out within the tree line, was actually a few meters into no man's land. Despite this setback, the inmates resolved to continue with their escape anyway. They'd just have to be more careful to avoid the German sentries that regularly patrolled the perimeter of the compound. With this in mind, they placed a watchman at the edge of the tree line, hidden in a spying nest set up by the Germans to surveil the camp from a distance. This person would periodically tug a rope that led into the exit hatch to signal an all clear. From 10:30 onwards, a steady stream of men made their way through the tunnel, slipping out into the darkness of the night between the gaps in the patrols. Over the course of the next 6 hours, 76 men escaped Stalag Luft III. But at 4:55 a.m., just over half an hour before dawn's first light, disaster struck. One of the escapees misinterpreted a rope tug to mean that he was clear to emerge from the tunnel. When he did, he came up right in front of one of the patrolling sentries, who after an initial shock collected himself, fired a warning shot, blew his whistle, and detained the man at gunpoint. The escape had been busted. Unfortunately, most of the men that had successfully escaped Stalag Luft III that fateful evening would end up being captured, some even before they'd left the town of Sagan. A nationwide search involving 60 to 70,000 Wehrmacht troops and Gestapo personnel was launched, making it almost impossible to travel through Germany undetected. The tunnel's discovery had doomed them. Ultimately, only 3 of the 76 men would evade capture entirely. 2 Norwegians, who managed to sneak their way to neutral Sweden via Stettin, and 1 Dutchman, who linked up with resistance forces in the Netherlands before travelling discreetly to the Spanish border and then Gibraltar. The vast majority of the other escapees were not so lucky. Over the course of the next few months, they would virtually vanish off the face of the earth, only to turn up back in the town of Sagan in burial urns, as nothing more than ash. Until the end of the war, no one knew for sure what had happened to them. A Royal Air Force investigation conducted following Germany's surrender found that 50 of the 73 recaptured prisoners had been shot in roadside summary executions. That is to say, illegally. Interviews conducted with the Gestapo personnel present for these executions show that the escapees were informed that they were to be returned to Stalag Luft III. In transit, they would be invited to leave the car to, quote, relieve themselves at the side of the road. Once the handcuffed prisoners began to do so, his captors would shoot him in the back of the head, at which point he would fall into the ditch in front of him. A truly undignified death. The scenery and the weaponry changed, but the methods rarely did. Most would be executed in this fashion. It helped the Gestapo construct the myth that the prisoners had been killed while trying to escape. But ultimately, this did little to conceal their true actions. A Swiss inspector at Stalag Luft III was immediately suspicious of the explanation and reported his findings to the British government. Many of the Gestapo men responsible for the extrajudicial killings of these POWs would be judged guilty of war crimes and sentenced to harsh prison sentences or death at the Nuremberg trials. While the flight from Stalag Luft III may not have been the largest by numbers prison escape during World War II, it was certainly the most impressive given the obstacles faced, the complexity of the planning, and the resulting fallout. The prisoners of that camp had set out to escape, die trying, or inconvenience the Germans to such a degree that it would affect the war effort. It's safe to say they succeeded. For a month, they occupied tens of thousands of German troops and led them on a wild goose chase, diverting resources that would have been more effectively used in the fight against the Allies. The Stalag Luft III escape did not end well. It ended in a war crime born of the want to dissuade others from following in its footsteps. Escape is no longer a sport, echoed like a shrill tempest through every camp in Europe. Escape at your own peril was the Nazi message. The threat didn't work. It never would have. Almost as soon as the remaining Stalag Luft III prisoners were informed of the deaths of their comrades, they began yet another tunnel in a bid to escape. The desire for freedom overrode even the strongest instincts of self-preservation. Thanks again to Call of War for sponsoring this video. Click on my link in the description below to get 13,000 free gold and 1 month of free premium membership to get you started on building your own empire today.